Seek guidance, less from reason, than from inspired feeling. For although suppressed emotions will distort the clarity of your perception, inspired feeling is intuition. In everything you do, tune into that clarity, and you'll always be guided correctly. So I'm going to read that first sentence again. Seek guidance, less from reason than from inspired feeling. This is a fortuitous topic this evening, this idea or this seeking guidance in our lives from inspiration. And to be inspired in life is one of the, you might say, one of the primary things that a devotee seeks in their life. To live, seek inspiration, to find inspiration, to be inspired in whatever one does. And life takes on a whole different meaning when we're living life from within an inspired state of consciousness. Now, people think, well, now, I would like to be inspired, but the muse, you might say, an artist who seeks inspiration, how does the muse, how do I draw that inspiration to me? It seems to be very whimsical. Sometimes I'm inspired, sometimes I'm not inspired. But our Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, said that inspiration, too, is something that can be drawn to us at the command of our will when we need it. And this is what we need to be able to do, and what comes to us when we practice these techniques of intuition, techniques of meditation, and we begin to awaken that intuitive faculty within us. There's a story from Yogananda's life when somebody asked him about this very question. He said, Master, can intuition be drawn at will? And Master says, oh yes, it can. And he says, I will demonstrate. And he meditated, put his focus at the point between the eyebrows, and he began to meditate just for a moment. Drew his consciousness there at that point, put it there. And he says, take this down. And then he began to recite a poem. And he recited from inspiration purely in the moment, quite a long poem, and he recited it to the person who took it down. Well, some months or years, a year or two later, Master published a book of poetry, and this poem was one of the poems that was included in that book, and it was reviewed by a columnist. I think it was in the Los Angeles Times, the main newspaper in Los Angeles. And in the book review of that book of poems, the reviewer noted, as he was writing, what a beautiful book it was, and the reviewer said, and there's one particular poem that I particularly want to draw your attention to because of its beauty. And he put in an excerpt of that very poem that Master had drawn through inspiration at the spur of the moment. And so it was. This is how a master lives. It's the state of consciousness in which a master lives. He lives in that state of elevated consciousness from which inspiration comes. And that inspiration comes, it's not a product of the mind, it's a product of the true inspiration is something we draw down from the superconscious realm. We draw it, it's new. And this is creativity is something ever new, and inspiration gives rise to creativity. And we draw that ever newness from the superconscious realm, and we draw it down. We attune ourselves to that realm, and we then place our inspiration in whatever direction that we want it to go. I remember at Swami Kriyananda, in the many, many decades that I lived in his company, he was a tremendously inspired person. He was an artist in many realms, photography. He was an artist he actually even painted some paintings, but certainly he was known mostly for his writing and also for his music. And he would travel the world and visit dozens, how many countries he visited. And he would often, when he would return from one of his travels, he would like to write music based upon the theme of that country he visited, and he would draw a melody For example, he took a tour once of the Egyptian pyramids and that part of the world in Egypt, and he came back and he was inspired by that, and he began to draw inspiration, and he would ask the divine, you could say, or his higher self, or that superconscious self. He would draw a melody, and he would sort of ask for it. He says, I need a melody. And something would come, and he would begin to write music, and it would be in the style, you might say, of that country. And in Egypt's case, he tried to imagine what might a melody be from 3,000 years ago. And it has a certain quality, if you listen to those songs that he wrote, that they evoke a spirit, you might say, of ancient Egypt. And so Swamiji wrote songs in this manner about many countries. Italy, of course, where he lived for many years, but also Romania, India, of course, even one for Japan, which I don't believe he ever visited Japan, but he tuned into that, and he drew inspiration to inspire melodies that had a Japanese quality to it. He even once, I remember a funny aspect of that, is a number of times he visited Hawaii. He would take a seclusion there, spend a vacation time there for a few weeks. And he wanted to write a music inspired by a Hawaiian theme. And so he did. He wrote a number of songs that had that Hawaiian melody type that is very familiar there. And he didn't speak Hawaiian, of course, but he was inspired to write a song in Hawaiian language. And he made an invented language. It was not really Hawaiian, but it sounded Hawaiian. And he said it just came to him, and you would have sworn that he was actually speaking Hawaiian, but it wasn't. But it said, this is what it ought to sound like. So he would have fun with it. I remember Mexico, he'd do that. He had a Mexican themed songs. But the point here is that he would be able to draw inspiration. Now, what is this? When we're speaking of inspiration, something all of us want. I've noticed something with inspiration when sometimes I have to give a discourse or a class, and I can't think of a thing to say, and there's a topic for the class, whatever the topic might be, and I tend to think intellectually about the topic, how I might point this, explore this point or that point or another point. And I just cannot find anything inspirational in my mind to say. And I found that when I speak in that way, perhaps it's a satsang that's supposed to be inspirational, if I start with the reason side of my mind, I can't quite make it work. But when I become blocked like that, what I try to do is I try to meditate and become inspired. What is inspiring to me at that moment? There's something, and this is, of course, takes a little bit of will, because we're not always inspired, but inspiration comes when we uplift our consciousness. You find this very interesting. When we exist on different levels of consciousness, and when we're on a certain level of consciousness, perhaps in the business world, we begin to draw ideas related to business, or if we're in the mechanical world, we draw inspiration according to mechanical ideas begin to come to us. But if you're wanting to give a satsang, you have to put your mind into that level of inspiration. So I'll meditate and I'll think about something in my life over the last few days that I had found inspiring. And it may have nothing to do with the topic at hand. And so on, but I found that the key is to become inspired about something. And you can do this, and with a little bit of practice, and you become inspired about something, and then what I do is I challenge myself, well, how do I relate this inspiration to the topic at hand? And I find that it's almost always possible to do that, because when you're inspired about something, that inspiration can find new ways to look at something that maybe wouldn't seem to be inspiring. You can transfer, you might say, that inspiration to something else, because what's happened is whenever you're inspired, there's an upliftment of life force, you might say, away from the senses into the deeper part of our consciousness and within ourselves, and we start to uplift that up to the brain. And this comes with a little bit of practice of meditation training. And once you're inspired, that flow of inspiration begins to come. Now, this is something also that is an important principle on the spiritual path as well. Some of you may be devotees of this path, and one of the teachings that we have is that we encourage people, and Master Paramahansa Yogananda would encourage people, and about the importance of learning to tune in and listen to the inner sounds, the deeper sounds, the Om vibration, that creative force of the universe that can be perceived within ourselves. And he gave certain techniques by which a person can practice to begin to listen to those sounds within the body and within the chakras, the energy points within the body. Each one of those produces a certain subtle sound that is not heard with the physical ears, but you might say is heard by the inner ear, the spiritual side, the chakra sound. If we can reach that point where we can calm the noise of the physical body, the distractions outside of the senses that are feeding us, and that noise, and we can learn to withdraw our life force away from the physical into the inner side of ourselves, we can begin to hear some of these inner sounds. Now, we teach this technique to many people who all potential students who potentially want to receive Kriya Yoga. It's called the Om technique of meditation, and people often complain, I don't hear sounds. I can't hear anything. I never hear sounds. And that's not an uncommon comment. And I have found a good piece of advice to tell people is to say, when in your daily life or in your life, if at any time you are inspired by something, perhaps a beautiful sunset, a beautiful piece of music, an inspired piece of poetry or reading, or something inspired you. When you're very inspired, look or pay attention. If you're deeply inspired, pay attention. You'll begin to notice sound. If you've trained yourself a little bit, you'll begin to notice inner sounds. You're more sensitive to those sounds at a time of inspiration. And so, and what's being demonstrated here is when you're inspired, you're more likely to be aware of those inner forces within you. You're more likely to have attuned yourself when you're inspired to the superconscious and have opened the door to allow superconscious states to come into yourself. And these sounds of the chakras are manifestations of a superconscious awareness within ourselves. So the key to being able to go deep in meditation, the key to being able to attune ourselves to the Om vibration, hear the Om vibration, the key to drawing joy or to draw higher states of awareness is to be inspired. And I think the key to successful meditation, any spiritual practice, is this: learn and train ourselves to raise our consciousness to the point where we feel inspired. Now, sometimes we sit to meditate and I'm just not inspired. I don't feel inspired. And you could say this is the work of meditation that comes in the daily training of learning to withdraw and inspire ourselves. Chanting and all of the various techniques and the ancillary techniques that are on the path are often meant for this very purpose, to be inspired. And when we're inspired, these things begin to come naturally. We don't have to work so hard. That's the key to the success in inner sadhana that we do. Now, there's another part to this as well, that the reading today was talking about guidance. We find that this is something all of us want. We want to be guided. We want to know, answer that question, what do I do in life? What's the right thing for me to do? Should I do this? Should I go left? Should I go right? How do I know what is the right thing to do in life? And it's a very essential question for all of us as devotees on the spiritual path, is to be rightly guided. Well, this too, right guidance comes when we're inspired. If inspiration comes, we begin to feel that guidance naturally comes into us. Paramahansa Yogananda, in one of the chapters in his book, The Experience in Cosmic Consciousness, where he experiences the state of samadhi, afterwards, in the latter part of that chapter, his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, advises him that now you understand that, our master says to Sri Yukteswar, now I understand that God is ever new joy. And that when I can feel that joy, and let's substitute for joy that inspiration, that divine inspiration, whenever I can feel that joy, that inspiration, even in the performance of every daily activity that I do in life, in that moment, I find myself subtly guided to the right course in life, even in the details. So if we're asking the question, how do I know God's will? Or perhaps how do I do God's will? How do I live my life rightly guided? The clue, or the answer to that, is to be inspired, divinely inspired. Feel divine inspiration. And in that divine inspiration, what you're feeling is you're feeling God's presence in that moment. And when you're divinely inspired, your footsteps are guided rightly to the highest course in whatever you do. That's it. The mind tends to think, what should I do in this case? And you begin to reason it out, thinking of, well, if I go, the proverbial, I'll make all the list of the reasons in my list of why I should do this action. And then over here I have the list of all the reasons why I shouldn't do that action. And then I'll sift it and I'll weigh the two and I'll come to a conclusion. Well, okay, that might work for some things. But really, if the better way is to raise the consciousness into joy. Practice being joyful. Now, perhaps that's easier said than done, but really it's not. It is difficult, but it's not beyond our ability. We have, as souls, we have been given the right to choose at every moment in our life. I can say yes and be happy. I can be positive, I can accept what comes as my karma and respond to it appropriately, or I can turn my back on it. And that is something that is a moment-by-moment decision each one of us has in life that we can choose. And we can, in other words, what I'm saying is we can choose to be happy. And if we put ourselves in that flow, that upward flow, we'll find ourselves being inspired. Be inspired to do, and of course that inspiration, if we can learn to train ourselves in one direction or another, we can draw that guidance, that inspiration according to what we need. Einstein was inspired to receive guidance and inspiration in physics, and not in handicrafts or what some other things that could have come. No, you receive the guidance that's going to be appropriate for your situation. But the key here is put yourself in joy. Or Lao, you might say, also state that, open the door to whatever it is that's blocking you to receive that joy. And if you can learn to train yourself to live in that joy moment by moment, you'll find yourself rightly guided and you'll find yourself inspired. And in that state of inspiration, that which you need in life will come to you at the moment's notice. So live in this way, be guided in this way. This does not mean that you should not use your reason. Yes, I will reason, I will act. As Master said, highest prayer. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the highest course in everything I do. If we keep the heart open into that inspiration, then the inspiration works through our reason. The inspiration works through our feeling. It works through our activity, and in that way we live in joy, we act in joy, and we spread that joy and share it with all others. I'm sorry this evening I was a little bit late, but many blessings to you, and I hope that you'll join us again next week for Living Wisely, Living Well. God bless you.